So there's like a lot of writing in Shadow of the Colossus. Um, just very long stretches of pretty much nothing but writing. Um, and on these rides, you don't really run into like enemies or NPCs that have dialogue or NPCs at all for that reason. And you might spend some time tracking down lizards or getting fruit out of the trees, but for the most part, that's all there is. It's just writing. There's just wind and stone and the sound of hooves moving through a world that feels far older than you. And what's really interesting is that this isn't a quiet game like by accident. It's an action game that chooses to be quiet. On paper, Shadow of the Colossus is a pretty simple game. You travel across Forbidden Land and defeat a small number of massive ancient enemies. And normally, a structure like that usually demands momentum. Fast travel, escalation, a constant sense of like a forward push. Like in God of War, where there's these huge bosses that you have to defeat, but in between, it just keeps that action going. It keeps ramping everything up, and so each new boss feels like a step up on this, massive journey. But instead, Shadow of the Colossus forces you to slow down. Every journey to a Colossus takes time. Sometimes a lot of it. You cross, wide open plains that feel almost empty. You ride past ruins of this ancient civilization that has no explanation. You move through all these spaces that exist without caring whether you pass through them or not. The game trusts travel to matter to you. In most action games, movement is something that, developers tend to like optimize out or at least minimize. They want to get you from one set piece to the next without losing your attention. Shadow of the Colossus does the opposite of that. I think that the space of the game is the true experience. Those long rides give you a lot of time. Time to notice the scale of the land and to feel small inside of it. It also gives your mind time to wander without interruption. And that was a gamble, because when this game was released, most other games were built around engagement. And a lot of games still are, but we have more slow games like Journey or Flower, which I think were inspired in a large part by Shadow of the Colossus being brave enough to slow down. All these games had bright rewards and constant interaction, and the assumption that the player needed stimulation to stay invested. But Shadow of the Colossus resists that entirely. It asks you to slow down in a genre that is not supposed to be slow. And the result is kind of unusual. The silence starts to feel intentional and heavy. By the time you reach a Colossus, you're already carrying the weight of the journey with you. The fight doesn't exist in isolation. It arrives after a long period of stillness. And taking that time to let the player think about their actions and why they're doing what they're doing makes victory feel complicated. Part of the weight of that travel comes from how the world is built, or more accurately, how it refuses to explain itself. The opening of this game tells you only what is necessary. This is a forbidden land, it's ancient and cursed. beyond that, the game is pretty much quiet. You get all your information from a disembodied voice in the ceiling. So, I don't know how much we can trust that. There aren't any characters that sit there and tell you about the history of the world or what this place was. There's no lore entries to decode from, a random ring that you find on a cliff. There's really no clear history to uncover here. But it's obvious that this world mattered. You ride past these massive bridges that connected obviously important places. You pass these structures that feel ceremonial and purposeful. Nothing feels randomly placed. You can imagine what these places may have been and what their functions may have been, but none of it's explained. That lack of explanation makes the world feel older than memory. And I think that works because the moment something is explained, it becomes smaller. It becomes knowable. Shadow of the Colossus refuses to let you know what's going on or where you are. It lets the land remain mysterious and a little bit eerie, but clearly ancient beyond your understanding. All this travel gives you time to wonder about who built this, why it mattered, and what was lost here. And the game never answers you. And that restraint makes the world feel magical in a very quiet way. The land doesn't need to be solved, it just exists, and you can feel that. And because the game never fills that silence, something else fills it instead. You do. Those long stretches of travel force you to be alone with yourself. There is nothing to manage, nothing to optimize, and no one to talk to, just motion, time, and yourself. When all the distractions fall away like that, your thoughts are given space to surface. For some players, those rides were very peaceful. For others, they may have been kind of heavy. They came with thoughts about direction and purpose and whether the thing that you're doing is worth the cost. All of these thoughts about your life had nothing to do with the game's mechanics. The game just gave them a place to exist. And I think that's part of why Shadow of the Colossus feels so personal to so many people. Not because the designers told a detailed story about it, but because they left it empty enough for you to bring your own life into the game. The landscapes became backdrops for personal reflection. The silence became a container for growth. Over time, those internal moments fused with the memory of the world. So, when we return to Shadow of the Colossus, we're not just revisiting a favorite childhood game. We're revisiting a version of ourselves that had the time to sit and wonder and feel small inside of something vast and beautiful. The game didn't manufacture that meaning, it just allowed it. It allowed it by slowing down and refusing to fill every moment. It trusted you with that emptiness. Meaning doesn't always come from doing more or having more. Sometimes it comes from stopping long enough to notice where you are. Riding through the empty world is not about getting to the next Colossus as efficiently as possible. It's about letting the journey exist on its own terms. The game doesn't tell you what to think during those rides, it just gives you the time to think at all. And maybe that's why it lingers. This game gives you time to slow down, look around, and ask yourself quietly if you're on the right path.